Hi again. Last time we printed an PDF header with some invoice information like invoice number and invoice date. And today we are going to look a little bit more into creating the parts of the PDF that shows the different addresses that we have added to this PDF document. So this could be interesting. I think I will make two functions to handle this. So let's start with checking the ship to address, I guess. And then we're going to print PDF and give it the contents as well. But I think we need also to tell it if it should print on the left or the right side, and I think we'll just give it a Boolean value because this is going to be a pretty simple operation. You could say that you put the X value for the text, so you say this text should start at this X value and this text should start at this X value, or perhaps even X and Y, and then build your text from there so you can move it around a bit in your document. But I don't have that requirement at the moment, so I will do this easy. So we'll build to address, contents, and that should be on the right side, so we give that a truthy value. So then we go to our address and create public void print PDF, and we should give it the same thing as the header, so it should have the contents and a Boolean value, and we can call that right side. So there we have our function, and then we need some I don't think we need a color, but we do need the PDF printer. We might need a font, and yeah, that should be enough. Did we created the font here as well? Yeah. So let's go back to the address. Put those in the header block up here. We already have the PDF printer, so you can remove that. We already had the font, and we don't need the color, so that was only the exception that actually were interesting to move over. But yeah, we need to also throw that exception because our functions will throw this exception, so it could be good to have it with us. And then let's start to print some values here. Let's see, we have our title, first and last name. We have some kind of address lines. We have a city and state and zip code and a country. And we have... And here comes a little bit of an interesting point, because I've noticed in my implementations that some regions need different kind of setup for actually showing dates. So some regions use the country value first and then zip code state. Some regions say the last name before the first name, and so on. So there could be some cultural differences in how you actually present an address to someone, which could make invoices really hard to read. If you send an invoice to, let's say, an Asian company, and my culture really differs from the Asian culture, and they read the actual information on the invoice differently than me, then they could actually infer a different first name for me, for instance. So that could be a bit of a interesting thing to look into, how you actually present the different address information. So let's do this easy. We just copy and paste some of our code that we used earlier and do some small changes to it. I think it's good enough to have an Helvetica. We don't need this large text up here, so this we call the address printer. And we should have an integer for our x value. So let's say that we use, what did it actually say? Well, we can look in the other function, because we had two columns. So one column was at 120 and one column was at 400. So I guess I will keep those distances. So let's say that our x value starts as 120, and if we're on the right side, we put x value at 400. So then we get the different sides. And I usually do this, that I first set a value and then changes it by using an if statement. In this case, we have such an easy statement, so we could actually type this as this shorthand. So assigned x to 400 if the right side is true, else assign it to 120. So that's quite handy when you have very simple functions. But if you have a larger context or more values to set, I usually, if I can, first set some values if those values aren't large classes that require a lot of initialization and so on. And then I have my if statement, and I change the information to the actual values if my if statement is true. And this is because the compiler will actually solve the issue of figuring out which branching it should do, and also the value, setting a value isn't that expensive, but it's, I think, easier to read a assignment and then a change of an assignment than to have an if statement and an else statement, because those can be quite long and hard to read sometimes. And sometimes you have if statement that checks for some validation targets, and then you exit after or continue to the next item, and those could be good to put higher up in your code as well, so you don't have functions that runs on forever. So let's continue here with our printer. So I don't think we need any header. So let's just say that we type something at our x position. And I think those values should be good enough. And I think we could move it a bit down. So if we are at 700, we might want to move down to 550. That could be a good start. I don't think that 24 is good here. I think we should go really long go down and say 14 should be a pretty good value. We don't need any color because that was our grayscale. Or do we? I think it could be nice to have the address a bit shaded or a bit lower alpha. Yeah, so I think we will keep that. And then we make some functions here. We want to get string value for get full name, let's say. So we don't actually have to put a lot of logic into our printing statement here. So here we have use Stringbuilder, and this is an efficient way to build strings. There are two different kinds of builders. There's a string builder and a string buffer, and the difference between those is that the string builder isn't thread safe and a bit faster, but a string buffer is thread safe. So if you're using Java with a lot of threads, then use a string buffer if you need to write to that buffer from different threads. Usually don't have to bother with that. And then we append this, get title. I think we just put a space between title and the name. And see here, what's the most readable? Yes, the most readable is to put the different actual statements on different lines. So I think I will format this append statement like this. And lastly, we want to append this get last name. And we return the string builders to string function. So it actually builds the complete string. We could use the plus statement between each value, and in this case it's probably not that big of a hit. If you have a large for loop or something like that, you really don't want to use the plus operator because it could be really slow and could create some problems for you. I wonder if we need to have that many points down, 10 points between lines. Yeah, we get that, and we so here we just put the address lines 1, 2, and 3, and then we say if we want to put the, let's see here, state, city, zip code, and a country. So let's say we set zip code and city, and we just put those there. Get zip code plus, I guess we can put the column between the, no, zip code and city, yeah. Those should just be a simple space between, but then we have the county or state, I call them, state and country. So there we go. Now we have something that will probably print our address information, and hopefully we could print both the right and the left side of the address, so we get both billing address and shipping address. So let's see how this looks. See here, push the right buttons, repackage it. Let's see if we get any new fancy errors that we have to handle. Of course, we got some, see here, yeah, we could go to the right directory before we run it. That could be good, so we actually have our POM file. See here, compiling 7 source files, and we got some errors. Text printer. That was not the name I gave it, I guess. Address printer. I guess somebody is actually screaming to the screen that I should remember to fix these. And I see here that I don't have the string builder either. I think the string builder is a util. Or no, it's probably a text string builder. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. I changed my key setup today, so easy to forget. Class color. Did I? Yeah, I changed back in the last second that I wanted the color. So, handling the imports. So, what did we see more? We had the string builder. String builder isn't defined. Color isn't defined. So, it's not in text. So, string builder. Where do we have it? Javalang. Okay. Javalang. The Windows key didn't work for me, so I changed it to the Alt key, and I forgot to actually push it every time because I'm so used to using. Why can't I create a string builder? Did I forget the new? Of course, you can't create an object without the new keyword. Then you will assign something to the function string builder, which is not defined. So that's kind of obvious. So let's see here. We got a build success. Target. Invoice. Dependencies. And there we got it. So let's see here. Invoice printed. Okay, can't load page. That was a bit different. Why? Cannot recognize version marking trying to repair broken xref. No pages in document. That's weird. So let's try this again and see if it works better. Still we only have this stamp of an. So okay. Then we first try to comment out our code just to see if it's the actual new code that breaks things. And if so, then we need to figure out what we actually have done wrong. No, it was not the new code. Weird. Really weird. Why? Build successfully. We run the dependencies. We don't get anything printed. Do we have any changes to this document? No, it seems as if we get this correctly. So we go back here and see. We have the invoice. We have these function. Let me for once push the right button. Let's see here. Go back. development is a lot of trial and error. Why? Because I'm an idiot. Single invoice. Trying to open a GIF by a PDF viewer is kind of impossible. And I guess somebody was screaming that as well, as hard as they could at their browser. And I'm sorry, sometimes you go a bit too fast. So, and we need to build, package it up. We run it, and we view it. So there we have it. We have our address, and I think it's a bit not that nicely formatted. I think the font is still a bit large. We don't have any address rows 2 and 3, which makes this a bit harder to read. And I also think that the positioning is a bit off. Perhaps we can move them a bit, so we will move our columns a bit. If we try to look at that, so here we see that they actually have shifted the text a bit, and they also have a header, build to ship to. So let's add those as well. So see here, we have a header printer, which has no color, and I also think we should have a header font that is bold, so it's more. So here we have an interesting bug. There we have it, and we will push some text above. So let's put that at, and we saw also that the push to go as far as 550 was a bit far, so I think we will go out up to 630 perhaps, and then go from there, so we don't end up in the lower parts of the document, because we really want to have some space for the actual invoice rows later on. And so let's push this up a bit, and then I think we should have something that tells us if we actually have an address too. So we create some Boolean functions. So you usually use the keywords is or has. Perhaps has is a bit more appropriate here. So let's see, address to public Boolean has address to. This just returns this address to, and this address to is empty, and we say that it should not be empty. And then we do the same with address 3. So we do this checks here. If we don't have a null check first, we actually could run into a null pointer exception, and that's not what we want. We want our functions to be as secure as possible. So we check if those are there, else we will not print them. And I see here that we actually have an implementation detail that we could go into. We could say that we want y and say that y should be 630. So we put y here, and then we have y minus 10, and put between each of these rows, because then we can actually steer our implementation and say that we should push y down a bit after each of these printed lines. So if there is an address 2 or 3, then it should be pushed down, else we don't print them. So that should be a simple thing to have. 14 points was a bit large, so let's go down to 8 points. Might be a bit small, but we'll see. So I think we're ready for another visual check where we are. Run it, and let's check. Yeah, we had the build failure, of course. Compilation error, variable address printer. Didn't I change that? I didn't. So of course we can't type a header with an address printer. That would be weird to use something before it's defined. So here we have it. It's actually built this time. Run it, and we'll check. This seems a bit more reasonable. We don't have the right header, but I think otherwise it's nicer. Might be bad to have such a gray tone on it. Those are really hard to read when there's such a difference. And I think the bold up here isn't good either. So I think I should remove the bold on each of these. So yeah, we use font here. Go back to that. So this could still have a color change, and I believe we remove the bold. Let's see here, header, font. We use that on example, and then when we go down to the other information, we actually remove the bold. So we tone it back a bit, so it's easier to read. And I think also that in this case we should print if there is right side, we hard code it to be the, see here, what did we say? Did we say shipping first or billing first? Ship to first. So it's if it's a right side, it's a bill to, and if it's else, it's a ship to address. So let's see how this will turn out. We build it, package it up, and everything passed. We run it, and we will look. This seems a bit more reasonable. It's easier to read, and yeah, I think it's quite nice. Font is perhaps a bit weird, but and perhaps we could push the color up even higher. Let's do that so it's easier to read. This is very high, so let's go to a color of 50. So it's just 80. So it's still quite dark. And do another build. Yeah. So if you like this video, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and please subscribe if you want more of these example videos where I go through building something and show each step of the process and talk about different techniques and so on. So I hope to see you in the next video.